Oops. Hello, hi everybody. We're live at last, and this is my UK election prediction. Sorry about the audios that I've been doing recently. I only did them to kind of save time and just to be a little bit more convenient when I had other things on the go. But without any further ado, let's talk about this election that's coming up on the 12th of December. So I'm going to recap some of my predictions to see how they went, and then we can have a look at this. It really had the strangest feel about it so far, this whole election. It doesn't feel like it's really kicked off. It feels almost like cloud cuckoo land. I mean, on the one hand, we've got Jeremy Corbyn, and his election manifesto is like a massive buffet with a huge as much as you can eat section. I mean, you name it, it's in there. And it almost seems like overkill. Then you get Boris Johnson. And I'll say the Tories manifesto is more like Starbucks. It's all about the coffee and the rest of the stuff is an afterthought. So it's all about Brexit and the rest of the stuff is just in there as a little bit of a filler. I do get the feeling Boris is really scared with this election. He's terrified of putting his foot in it with any one policy that might not go down well. So he's trying to make it all about Brexit, which I think could be a good strategy because it's really simplified for people and people know what they're getting. And I also think it's silly to make too many proposals about policy because until Brexit is done, we don't really know where we're at. So that could be pragmatic. But on the other hand, I also think Boris is chasing into a progressive route just to keep up with Jeremy Corbyn and to make sure he captures Labour Leave voters. So he's throwing in lots of spending promises. When I'm not sure the age of austerity is or should be over, we still need some fiscal responsibility. Where is the Conservative in conservatism? Then, of course, we've got Jo Swinson, and I'd compare her manifesto to a birthday party at Frankie and Benny's. I mean, out they come with the candles, there's this music that comes on, clips, congratulations, and it's all a bit cringe. And then you have, of course, Nicola Sturgeon. Now, what her policies remind me of is a restaurant I once went to. They had a massive menu, but when you asked for any one thing, the answer was invariably, oh, well, we don't have that today, or there's a problem with that dish, or should you rather have the substitute? So in other words, there's lots in there, but when you think it through, nothing really adds up. Hi, Simon. Evening. Terrible interview by Corbyn tonight. I haven't watched it yet, but Nicola Sturgeon also had a car crash. I mean, when she got questions on the NHS, the interviewer, sorry, his name, Andrew Marr, was it? He said that she says people should be worried about Trump controlling the NHS. He said, shouldn't people be worried about you controlling the NHS? I mean, there was something about pigeon droppings contaminating water and causing infant fatalities in a hospital. Sounded really a car crash what's going on in the NHS Scotland. And she isn't really able to ask questions in terms of Scotland leaving the UK and how that would all work. And I'm not surprised Jeremy Corbyn has a car crash interview because a lot of the interviews have been quite forensic and quite detailed, and they've gone hard on all the leaders. And I think what Tories are missing a massive opportunity. Labour have so many policies that really are scare stories. It's an open goal, and yet Conservatives are failing to capitalise and to really shoot for that goal. And I really do think that the Labour policies are not hard to pick apart and find the ludicrousness of them, as I did in one of my audio blogs. Okay, so let's have a look. You know what? The best line of this election so far was when Boris said we'll be Corbyn neutral by Christmas. I really like that one. I thought it was quite clever. It's one of the few lines that were good. Hi, Jonathan. I can't believe you got the December election prediction right. What's happening to the Liberal Democrats? I thought Labour would be getting a hammering over their Brexit party alone. Yes, we're coming to that. Andrew Neil, yes, thank you. He's done really well on these interviews. So let's see where we're at. Back in June 2016, and it's a very, very long time ago, I made my prediction that Brexit would happen. And I said at the time, as one of you subscribers actually remembered, that there'd be a lot of twists and turns. And boy, has that been true. Then I said that Theresa May would be Prime Minister. I said in February last year that Boris Johnson would become Prime Minister. I said in about September, August that we wouldn't be leaving on October the 31st, despite all the assurances we would. Then I actually said we'd have either a November or a January general election. I was more keen on the January one, but hey, it's slap bang in the middle. It's a December election. And I know some of you have asked me if this will be a disastrous one, like the December election of, was it in the 20s? There was a disastrous one for the Tories. And my answer to that is no, the simple answer. So what am I predicting now? Well, okay, let's go for the predictions. So I had a look back in time to see synergies with other general elections. And the one that came up most notably was the 1931 general election That was a terrible year for Labour. The national government, which was made up mainly of the Conservatives, won a landslide. In fact, they had 400 seats, over 400 seats. And that feat wasn't achieved again till Tony Blair in 1997. I also see a synergy with 1983 when Margaret Thatcher did particularly well, even though that year it was thought that Michael Foot, wasn't it? They thought that Labour and Michael Foot were going to do really well, but Thatcher really walked it. So what is similar, just to pump up the astrology here, in 1931, Pluto was at 22 degrees of Cancer. Now, the cardinal signs are always very important and influential in the UK's chart. Right now, Pluto is at 22 degrees of Capricorn as well. So we got that 22 degree thing, and it's in the opposite sign. So in 1931, Cancer, and now it's in Capricorn. That was the first synergy. The next is that the nodes are sort of between 3 and 8 degrees of cardinal signs. In 1931, it was 3 degrees of Aries, the North Node, and now the North Node is 8 degrees of Cancer. Mars was in Scorpio both times, Scorpio being ruling the second house in the UK's chart, being more, I'd say, second house is more of a conservative house, particularly good for the economy. Yes, what else have we got there? Saturn was in 1931 on 13 degrees of Capricorn. Saturn is now 19 degrees in Capricorn. So Saturn in a similar position. So, and also what I'm seeing on the night of the election at 10 o'clock midnight, the moon is void of course. When the moon is void of course and there's competing forces, it usually indicates that the outcome will be the expected one. So on the basis of that, it would be highly unlikely that Labour pull off a surprise win or even form a government with a coalition with the SNP. Now, I have noticed that a lot of Labour supporters are very bullish about this, but then they always tend to be. I do remember when in 2015 election, which I also predicted would go a overall win for the Tories, when Ian Dale announced the exit poll result at 10 o'clock that evening, Labour people were just saying, no, wrong, the exit polls have totally got it wrong, this is not what we are hearing on the doorstep. Emily Thornberry nearly had a heart attack. She was convinced that the exit poll was wrong. It proved to be right. Labour tend to overestimate. Now, I know that in the 2017 election, Theresa May had a bit of a mare, and Jeremy Corbyn had quite a bounce. He did a lot better than people were expecting him to. However, I've looked in his chart and I really don't see that repeating for him, although I get the feeling that a lot of Labour people really do think it's going to repeat for him and he'll get that similar bounce and he'll overperform. I actually think Labour are going to underperform. So the signs are that this is going to be quite a big Tory victory. I don't think it's going to be a landslide like in 1931. I don't think it'll be as big as that, but I do think it's going to be a significant Tory victory, which is good news. However, I must say that if I wasn't doing astrology, I'd be rather concerned right now, because have you heard that 3 million extra voters have been registered to vote in the last 3 weeks? Most of these are being pushed by Remainer type organizations or people who have in the past been linked to Remainer organizations. They've opened these initiatives mainly to get students signed up and to get people who are more likely to vote Remain signed up. It's rather worrying that that amount of people will now be voting because they'll potentially be Remain. But on the other hand, having them signed up is one thing. Will they make the effort on the day? I'm not quite sure. What I'm going to be doing just now is doing a seat-by-seat prediction for all the parties. I'm not going through every 650, but I'm going to look at all the marginal seats. But what I found in my reviewing of how the election went in 2017, the vote number was up between about 2,000 to 4,000, sometimes 5,000 in every constituency. And when you looked, nearly all the extra votes were going to Labour, which is why Labour did really well. They did an excellent job in 2017 of getting their vote out. So I think they worked very hard in all the constituencies. And that's something that I hope the Brexit Party are counting with a big ground force. But you see, the problem here is Labour have more members than any other party. I think they've got 150,000. Tories have far less. Brexit Party, a new party. Very hard to compete with that. So that is one of my concerns, all these extra voters kind of being egged on, and particularly because obviously they are Remain voters. So my prediction is I think the Tories are going to do well. What do I think? I think we will, in terms of Brexit, I do think we'll leave January the 31st. And when Boris talks of having it all done and dusted in a year, from astrology, I'd say that is actually possible. There will be 3 significant phases next year in terms of the deal, and that'll be April, another one in September, and at the end of the year, when we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that could be when we have finally left. Although what has become quite confusing lately is it seems Boris has this, this deal. It's a treaty, a binding treaty, according to Nigel Farage. Although there are rumblings now that even with this deal or this treaty, we may still end up with no deal or a bare bones deal rather than a Canada-style arrangement. So while a lot of us are not scared of no deal, I certainly want no deal along with being bound by all the things in this treaty, because that seems totally counterintuitive, that we would sign a treaty, be obliged to pay over thousands, still remain linked in to various of the EU institutions and regulations, but still come out without a deal. It seems extraordinary that that could even be being talked about right now. So I've said all along that we will end up with a substantial Brexit. And I know a lot of people doubt me because, of course, it's in Nigel Farage's interests to put out stories that Boris's deal is useless. But we don't know yet what Boris can do if he has a big majority. And all the signs are from astrologically that he will have a big majority. Now, I noticed the Telegraph are very bullish about the Tories' chances, extremely optimistic, actually. Myself, I'd be more doubtful if I hadn't looked at the chart, because, as I say, there's a lot against them. The Labour people seem to be extremely motivated, and there are a lot of hardened Labour supporters there. Unfortunately, as I've said in my previous vlog, when I looked at the Labour manifesto, the Labour's playing this NHS thing very cleverly. I've noticed on my timelines on Facebook, a lot of people are sort of conned by the Trump's going to steal our NHS, or the Tories are going to damage our NHS. That kind of thing has spooked a lot of people. And on the basis of that alone, they might be drawn into voting for Labour. So let's have a little look. Now, I'm going to come back in detail to Brexit Party seats. However, Richard Tice looks like he's going to win his seat in Hartlepool. That, I would say, is the most likely Brexit Party seat, and Richard Tice's chart looks fairly good. If you remember my prediction before, I thought Anne Widdecombe's chart looked great for January time. And I see that she's running in Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport. That's the constituency she's running in. The Southwest in general is not the strongest area for the Brexit Party, but I assume they've chosen that seat for Anne because she's got a good chance. I'd say she's got an excellent chance, although that constituency on itself would be pretty hard to win, but her chart looks good. Nigel's chart looks really good, and so I think there will be a couple of Brexit Party MPs. Someone on Ian Dale's show from the Brexit Party said they're aiming for 20. I think that's totally unrealistic in a first past the post system, especially having looked at the seats as I have. Maximum 12, but I even think to get 5, they've got to really do a lot. There's huge majorities in the northeast of Labour to be overturned. All depends how it goes, but I'll look at that again later. So also the polling that's been coming out, just to see how this worked. I registered on YouGov to be eligible to take part in polling. They've polled me quite a lot, asking me how likely I am to vote, what my big issues are, which party I'll vote for, which party I would have voted for if Brexit Party was standing in my constituency, and am I voting tactically? But you see, they are asking me over and over again, and I feel a lot of these polls keep going back to the same people who have already registered or who are somehow on the radar. So new voters coming in, young voters voting for the first time, maybe Brexiteer voters who don't usually bother to vote, who are getting more engaged with politics, voting for the first time. These are huge unknown quantities, as is turnout on the day. And the question remains is if the Labour is going to get their voters out in the huge numbers that they did in 2017. You know, do people still have that same enthusiasm for Jeremy? Have they started to see through him? Are they beginning to think through some of his policies and think this is really? Seriously? I don't know. Okay, let's talk. I just want to talk briefly now. I've done my prediction about some of the issues that are being bandied about. Now, I've noticed they've done a very clever thing of conflating immigration with the NHS. So we are told, well, without immigration, you know, we wouldn't have these wonderful doctors and nurses and everything in our NHS. Yes, that's absolutely right. Skilled and talented immigration, great. However, on a practical level, first of all, not every immigrant works in the NHS. Secondly, even if a nurse or doctor comes to work in the NHS from another country, they bring their family with them. That could include a husband and children. They have to live somewhere. So it's more pressure on the housing stock, more pressure on services. People who work in the NHS also get sick, so they're also going to add pressure. So importing all these workers in to substitute the NHS, to full skills shortages, isn't exactly a long-term solution. And what I keep asking myself is, why are we not producing more skilled labor? We're one of the richest countries in the world, a very sophisticated, established country. They act like we're a third world country that are begging for talent to come in to perform certain roles, which is baffling to me. I believe that one of the major problems why we don't have nurses is because staff retention is terrible. 40,000 nurses have left in the last, I think it's the last 9 years. And that's why we still continually need to top that up. So even when people come into the nursing profession, they don't stay in. That needs to be addressed. Apparently, there are 12,000 students who had the grades and wanted to enter medical school, but could not, for some reason, find places. Is that because universities are offering more and more places to foreign students because of the huge amounts of money they have to pay? Why is it that students from the UK want to become doctors, cannot find the places? It's almost as if they don't want to train our people and they rather would import talent, and that goes for around the board. If you look at a list of the top 250 universities in the world, and I assume this is an objective list, there are lists around you can search, you will find that the UK universities score very high. Other than America, I'd say the UK probably has the most universities on that list. And yet we're not drawing our talent from those universities. We are importing universities from countries or even from continents that don't have one university in the top 250. And then we're told how wonderful all this talent is. Why aren't we producing our own? And I honestly think it's both ideological and perhaps financial, where the effort just isn't being put in to train our own people. And that certainly disturbs me. To go back to immigration, if they could just crack down on illegal immigration, then I, as a voter, would be happy. And yet I see no inclination for them to do that. They keep talking about, the Australian style point system. I'm sorry, I'm tired of hearing about an Australian style point system because we are not Australia. Have you seen the size of Australia? I do know that most of the country is uninhabitable due to desert. However, the UK is already overcrowded. We are one of the most overcrowded countries. Or should I say England is, not Scotland and Wales necessarily. We are already one of the most overcrowded countries in the world. So bringing more and more people in. It seems to me on the Tory side, they're treating immigration like a Ponzi scheme, where you need more and more people in order to pay the pensions. And because they intend to continue running such massive debt and they keep having to make interest payments and some capital repayments, they see immigration increasing as a solution to this. And then, of course, from Labour's aside, it's ideological because communism is worldwide. I see a message there. The EU isn't collapsing, Lisa. The UK is. Get real. Well, let's check that out next year. Recession, Germany narrowly avoiding recession. I don't want to get sidetracked on that. How can you give me a tangible example of how the UK is collapsing? Because really, it's the EU that have all this youth unemployment. It's the EU that are, where is the far right rising? Where's the Vox party rising? The discontent rising in the whole of Europe. Can I point you to the yellow vests that have been rioting every week in France? Rioting, but protesting every week in France. Huge amount of discontent. And I'd like to see how the EU is doing when we're not contributing as well. That'll be interesting to see because they have major structural problems. Plus the fact of what Trump is doing is also hurting their trade. Their exports have gone down. I don't see a bright lining in Europe either. Massive regulation is killing their competitiveness. More regulation, you get less profitability. The EU has grown out of all, the EU as an institution has grown out of all proportion, and it's dampening down the prospects of the whole of Europe. It's achieved no growth. The only continent with lower growth than the EU is Antarctica. And I don't see any sign that the UK is collapsing. In fact, with some exciting new policies, which I actually don't see any party coming up with. I think the UK could be the place to be at because of the added flexibility we'll have and the ability to form a trade deal with America, our closest ally, and the country who we've fought two world wars with, and I won't and with Russia against the people in the EU. I certainly see that Macron has extremely low approval ratings, as does Merkel. I don't see any wonderful leaders emerging in the EU, and I also don't see any great ideas to revive the economy emerging in the EU. Spain has a debt crisis, Italy has a debt crisis. The EU have to deal with the fact that from now on they're making a fiscal transfer from Germany out to Greece, Italy, and all the other smaller countries in perpetuity, because those countries are never going to be able to recover and achieve growth again, because they are stagnant, because they're tied to the euro currency, which is failing. So no, I don't agree with that comment. Whoever made it, sorry, I haven't got your... Sue, yes, Sue, I'll come to Brexit Party predictions. Okay, sorry, I just got a little bit sidetracked because of that comment I had. Also within the NHS, the more people are coming from countries, there was actually a doctor ringing up the radio the other day, and she said it takes so much longer to deal with people because so few people are proficient in English. And the more people you have with different languages, it's tying up the court system, it's tying up the NHS, because we need so many translators to get beyond all these language barriers. So it's not necessarily the huge panacea that they make it out to be. One question is, what is the ideal level for immigration, or what is the ideal level or the maximum amount of people that we can have living in the UK? Because we don't know that. As you know, a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme, the bottom layer just keeps having to get bigger and bigger and bigger to support the top layers. So when does this immigration thing reach its diminishing returns of scale? I think we've already hit that, and we need to be asking ourselves, for example, look how people are packed onto the tube. The transport system in London literally cannot cope with any more people, and yet they want to punish people for using cars and have more buses, more people on public transport. How's it going to cope? The infrastructure takes a long time to build. You have to plan many years in ahead, 20, 30 years ahead, to build enough infrastructure. You can't just have it on demand, and yet immigration happens overnight. Literally overnight, you can have thousands of people coming in who have to be accommodated. It puts more pressure on. Prices go up. I know the businesses love it because they can sell more, so it's good for their profit. So the people at the top love it. Labour love it from an ideological point of view because they see it as importing voters. Just Jeremy Corbyn, for a while ago, he was talking about, by the way, the 25% discount if you live alone in your home and your council tax. That's also going under Labour. So it's just a war on people. And as a self-employed person, I don't think there's anything in their manifesto. It's all for the people working in the public services, 4-day week and pay rises and all that. And there'll be more and more people in the public services if they intend to nationalise. And how would they do it? Well, according to Mike Graham, who was talking to a Labour person, to John McDonnell, Mike Graham asked John McDonnell, how are you going to do all this nationalisation? They're just going to pass legislation. But the thing is, companies are already moving their head offices out of the UK or planning to ahead of it. So they are going to preempt it. They're not just going to sit here, all these companies, and wait for Corbyn to come for them and nationalise. They are preempting that, moving their assets out and taking out contingency measures. And I think with his 25 corporate tax rate, we'll see all the companies going and sitting in Ireland where they can perfectly well do business here, but keep their tax money away. I just don't think this is thought out. The world isn't going to stay static while Corbyn does what he wants to do. Everyone else is going to readjust themselves in order to avoid what he's going to do. And it's going to collapse, I think, cause a big collapse in the economy. So yes, a while ago, Jeremy Corbyn was talking about manufacturing and how to revive it. I think he's now realised he can't. What country in the world is going to relocate to manufacture here at a 20%, 26% corporate tax rate, which is on the high end in Europe, and with a 10% of your share stock has to be given to the staff. They have to have 10% ownership. What is the incentive? I mean, when Trump talked about bringing manufacturing back and he said Obama told him you need a magic wand, well, I think Corbyn needs a magic wand, really, because it's clear to see how Trump's policies would attract manufacturing back by giving them tax breaks, by putting tariffs on the imports so it didn't serve companies to put their manufacturing in Mexico. That made logical sense. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn, to bring manufacturing back, everything he's proposing is only going to damage that. Okay. Yes, like I said, Labour were excellent at getting the vote out. Labour, biggest spend ever. Where's all this money coming from? Personally, you know what debt does to your finances. It creates a hefty burden, and I just don't agree with taking all this debt on. Immigration, like I say, we need to know where we're aiming for. People talk about the Australian point system, but we need to have a clearer idea of what's the maximum capacity this country can take going forward. Okay, another thing that the NHS, until someone deals with waste in the NHS, the NHS acts not only as a health provider, but also as an employment provider. And so loads of people are employed within it just to keep people off the jobless totals. There are too many people in procurement. There are too many managers. There are too many senior managers being paid a fortune and then hiring consultants to tell them how to do their job. That's the problem in the NHS. It's become ideological. It's not just a service provider. So that needs to be addressed. There needs to be pruning. I thought David Cameron was talking about that years ago, but now all people are talking about it is throwing more money at it, which is just not going to help if people who need the service are increasing. There are more customers coming through the door all the time, and yet they're just throwing more money, more good money. It's not really good money after bad, but you just cannot keep up. The infrastructure cannot keep up with the influx. So that is some of my views on the various policies and things being talked about. Next, I'm going to be talking about seat predictions. Jonathan, I would just be happy if all the points of entry had proper security. It broke my heart when I see all those people who are being smuggled. Yeah, I know. And have we seen a sufficient response to that? People are going to continue to risk their lives because they know that there's a chance that it will be worth it, and that means there'll be a lot more deaths on the way. And who's profiting? The people smugglers are profiting, and our government just don't want to touch this issue because, again, it requires money and it requires infrastructure that they've already got rid of. And I think ideologically both major parties are committed to mass immigration, one for economic purposes and the other for ideological. So I don't think we're going to get that. Andrew Neil. London seats. I'm going to talk about London seats, and Sue, I'm going to talk about Brexit Party. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that all made sense. And next we'll be coming on to my seats prediction. Okay, thanks for joining me.